Hi, and welcome to Morning Coffee with Pazan Academy. I'm Deanna, and it's Great Books Monday. And I want to talk to you today about why the great books have fallen out of favor in modern education. But first, what do we mean by the great books? These are the greatest works in the West of history, literature, and philosophy. Works such as Aristotle's philosophy, or Shakespeare's plays, or Plutarch's histories, just to name a few. There are so many in this corpus of great books. Now, these books used to be just what everyone read in a normal education. They didn't have textbooks like what we have today. These served as those textbooks. And so if you wanted to become learned, you would study these great works by these great thinkers. People that were even self-taught, like Benjamin Franklin or Abraham Lincoln, turned to the great books, as we call them today, in order to become educated. This is what everyone did for hundreds of years. Now, just because it's what was done for hundreds of years, that's not what gives it value. We'll talk about what gives it value, but first, why did they fall out of favor? Well, we have to go back about 100 years and talk about an education reformer named John Dewey. He argued that education really needed to be focused on skills and making sure that everyone can get a job. Well, that sounds great. We all want to be able to have a job and support ourselves. But what happens is that there's a shift in education away from learning these great books and wanting to have just an educated society that could speak in the same way, that could learn to live in the same universe together. He was really focused on these skills. And so education begins to shift. Now, by the 1930s and definitely by the 1950s, you have a group of academics that are seeing this transformation in education, and they want to re-establish a place for the great books. And so they begin forming these university programs for the great books. They even release a set of books called The Great Books, which is kind of like an encyclopedia for these great works by these great minds over time. Now, the unintended consequence of these great books programs, is that there's a shift in thinking in the culture that these works are elite, that they're only for people studying in university, this sort of ivory tower, and that if you are a philosophy major, that's when you read the works of the ancient Greek philosophers or the Enlightenment philosophers, but they don't apply to just the regular person on the street. And this wasn't always the case. Less than 100 years prior, you had people that were just learning from these great books. And how they learned was by reading these works that we now tend to think of being as sort of an ivory tower or almost elitist corpus of work that the normal person just doesn't read. So the great books, the works of the ancient Greeks and the Romans and the Renaissance thinkers, the Enlightenment thinkers, these were works that for hundreds and hundreds of years, even the Romans read the ancient Greeks as part of their education. These works are what the pedagogical standard was, and they weren't removed from everyday existence. They were part of everyday existence. So just like you might talk about the latest show that's on Netflix today with your neighbor, everyone would have understood these little pop culture references at the time. It's like having an Easter egg in a Marvel movie. The culture who goes to see those movies, they know everything and they can get it, and then they appropriately laugh or cry or get excited, and it would have been the same thing. People would have been dropping little nuggets from the great books because this was the language that everybody spoke. This is what everybody learned. Going back to Ben Franklin, he was self-educated and he knew it was these books that he would have to read in order to educate himself. But it wasn't because he wanted to be a politician or because he wanted to have some status and climb up the social ladder. He was really curious. He was an inventor, and it's by reading these great books that he learned that through observation and experimentation, he could figure out problems. So these books books teach you how to think. They teach you how to live in a world with other humans. There are so many examples from Shakespeare, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, all of these classics. And we can read them and understand people. We can learn from different situations. It helps us go through life and it helps us think better. We have a standard of excellence in order to understand the best way to behave or the best way to deal with maybe not the most optimal situation. And that's what the great books provide. So ironically, even though these academics in the mid-20th century and even John Dewey, who wanted really to advocate for practical education, what happened is the great books became isolated or highbrow or scary or not something that really appeals to me or even matters to me because I'm going to go into computer coding. But we know from some of these tech companies that have put out white papers or have written articles about their people who are trained really well in computer coding or in a STEM field, but they're lacking some of the components they need in order to interact with other humans. I know people who've worked for tech companies and they have a hard time hiring in people that can write an email very well or who can, project manage and really lead people to inspire people. That's what these great books teach you. They teach you how to live in the world with other humans and how to think for yourself and how to problem solve and how to be critical and go back to sources, to fact check and understand the past. And so that is why the great books are so much more practical than anything else you can do to educate yourself or your kids. I hope this has inspired you to read a great book or have your family read a great book. We have a great books program, so you can go to our website and check that out. And we have links to our social media, and make sure you sign up for our mailing list because we have fun content that we send out a few times a week. Have a great one, and we'll see you next time.